Before we begin, we are required by law to remind you of the location of exit doors around the perimeter of the hall. As you face the stage, you will find an exit on the left and on the right. To the rear of the hall, there are two exits, one at the top of each aisle. Please be aware that your closest exit may be behind you. Thank you.
Huh. What is... There should be people.
Yeah, I'll get somebody's attention. It's all right. I'm talking to Rob right now. By
Okay.
eyes.
All right, okay.
Nope. There we go. All right, can you all hear me? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Publick Occurences. My name is Ray Nunez. I am the Communications and Engagement Specialist with Leadership Rhode Island, and I have the tremendous honor of showing all of you how to use your iClickers today. Can everybody hold up their iClickers just to make sure everybody got one? If you did not get one, one of the young men at the door will hand you one. All righty. So, most importantly, first and foremost, we are going to all make sure that our clickers are on and have power. So down at the very bottom, it says on and off. Click that once. Once you click it, you're going to see that the blue power light turns on. If anybody's blue power light does not turn on, just raise your hand and we'll sub you out for a brand new one. All right. So we're going to run through some sample questions just to get everybody up to speed on how to use this device. So as you can see, there are options A, B, C, D, and E. You are going to wait until the timer shows up for the question. Once that timer turns on, that's when it's open for you to vote. Before then, your vote's not going to count until you see that timer. So make sure you see that little timer on the corner. Otherwise, your vote's not going to count, and we're going to make sure that everybody does vote. So, are we all ready? We feel comfortable? Up to speed? All right, let's try a sample question just to get started. When you were in school, which of these was your favorite cafeteria lunch? Choose A for fish sticks, B for pizza, C sloppy joes, chef salad, or E mystery meat. All right, the timer is live. Everybody please cast your vote. I'm not trying to sway anybody, but I'm a big pizza fan, and I'm rooting for pizza today. All right, everybody cast their vote. Let's go ahead and close the polls. All right, and you can see everybody's result. Pizza won. The power of influence from the podium swayed the elections today. Let's try the second question. Do you have a child in K through 12 school in Rhode Island? Again, wait for that timer to show up. All right, you may now cast your vote. A for yes, public school, including charter. B, yes, private or parochial school. Or C, no. All right, everybody cast your vote. All right, let's close those polls, Rob. C, no. All right. Great, next question. Do you work for a public school system, including charters, in Rhode Island? A for yes, B for no. All right, we all voted? We all participated? All right, let's close the polls. B, no. All right, last question. Officials propose a $250 million school building bond referendum. If the referendum were held today, how would you vote? A, in favor. B, against. C, I need more information to decide. Or D, I'm not eligible to vote in the state of Rhode Island. All right. Let's go ahead and close the polls. All right, looks like A is leaning in favor. All right, does everybody feel comfortable with voting? Everybody's familiarized themselves with their iClicker devices? Good. If anybody, again, if your clicker is not working, if the light is not on, just raise your hand nice and high, just like our teachers would have liked us to, and somebody's going to come and collect your clicker. All right, great. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So, a few facts. 306 public schools in Rhode Island. Average age of a building in Rhode Island, 56 years old. Providence alone needs $372 million. There's a lot that says that absenteeism is affected by a tough environment, right? There's more absenteeism. The amount of snow days and how plumbing affects whether we can go to school, these kinds of things. Do you know there are no requirements for school safety features or construction in Rhode Island in terms of, say, school shootings? The state does reimburse districts for security upgrades. Some things to think about and some things that we'll probably talk about this evening. I'm Mike Ritz. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Rhode Island, and for the evening, I will be your moderator. Welcome to the 8th year of Publick Occurences, Rhode Island Schools in Crisis. Who in the audience has been here to another Publick Occurences before? Hey, not too bad. Welcome back. For those of you who haven't, welcome for your first time. These forums, which have been attended by nearly 6,000 Rhode Islanders over the years, are an exercise in productive civil discourse. What can happen when a community comes together full of neighbors and to learn about really critical issues that the state faces and, more importantly, is able to discuss them? How do we do that as a community? We're going to do a lot of that tonight. Before we do, I want to, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Jerry August, the co-dean of Rhode Island College's School of Education. She's going to greet you on behalf of Rhode Island College.
Good evening, and welcome to Rhode Island College. I'm privileged to welcome you here. Thank you for joining us tonight. Rhode Island College is proud to partner with the Providence Journal and Leadership Rhode Island to have these important discussions with the community. And tonight's topic, Rhode Island Schools in Crisis, is a particularly timely one. As the home of the state's largest teacher education program, Rhode Island College plays a key role in Rhode Island's educational ecosystem. We know that a quality education depends on many factors, not the least of which is a safe and engaging environment in which to teach and to learn. Throughout my 12 years as a teacher educator, I have had the privilege and responsibility of working with teacher candidates and classroom teachers, preparing them to promote the academic and social well-being of school children. That work is always changing, adapting to the needs of today and anticipating the needs of tomorrow. We are experiencing a wave of that change now at Rhode Island College as we work to transform the curriculum of our Feinstein School of Education and Human Development. Our future teachers will be prepared to effectively teach English language learners, to effectively teach students with disabilities. They will be prepared to teach America's future poets. They will be prepared to teach America's future computer scientists. They will be ready to address the needs of any student in any school on any day. Let's make sure those schools are ready too. Let's show our kids how valuable their education is. Let's show our teachers how important their work is. We know from the Providence Journal's recent series on this topic, as reported by Linda Borg, many of Rhode Island's schools simply do not make the grade. They are literally falling apart. I look forward to tonight's discussion, as I'm sure you do, as we explore this issue from all angles. Thank you again for coming. Let's get started.
And on behalf of the Providence Journal, please welcome Alan Rosenberg, the executive editor.
Thank you, Mike. and I'm going to keep this short and sweet so that we can get to the good stuff. But I do bring greetings from the Providence Journal. I'd like to thank our partners in the Public Occurrences series, Rhode Island College and Leadership Rhode Island, and especially you for coming out on a rainy and blustery evening to hear about one of the most pressing issues in this state. Should we spend $250 million just in this one bond issue to upgrade Rhode Island schools? And if we're going to spend it, where and on what? These are among the most important questions we face today. I'm looking forward to a discussion tonight that will help us understand those questions and get closer to the answers.
All right, so tonight's format's changing us slightly from what you might be accustomed to if you've been to a Public Occurrences. We're looking to optimize the Q&A for the evening. So we won't be making formal introductions or opening remarks, and I encourage you to look in your program booklet for bios and the folks, the fine folks that are on stage with us tonight. Tonight's event is being filmed and live streamed thanks to the students at Rhode Island College. Thank you, students of Rhode Island College. For those of you who can't sit still without a hashtag and some Twitter action, we encourage you to use hashtag ProJoeSchools, and there is a Twitter feed on screen all night. And the Providence Journal journalists asking tonight's questions are Linda Borg. Raise your hand, Linda. Yeah, who has run this series, and you've probably read a lot about it. And, of course, everyone knows Wayne Miller. Thank you. Resounding, I tell you. So let me introduce you to the panelists to my right. All the way down on the very end, on panel one, is Seth Magaziner, General Treasurer of the State of Rhode Island. Next to him is Superintendent Colleen Burns-Germain of the Newport Public Schools. We're very fortunate to have a student with us tonight, Amelia Lopez, student at Classical High School. She brought a fan club, clearly. On panel two, we have Kevin Gallagher, Rhode Island Deputy Chief of Staff. Tim Duffy, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Association of School Committees. And the mayor of this fine city, Jorge Alorza. Following down, we have William Bryan, Senior Project Executive at Gilbane. Susan Zoll, Childhood Education Specialist and Rick Professor. And our other student, Colin Galliano, student at North Kingstown High School. So we're going to start this evening. For those of you who have an iClicker, get at the ready. Ray told you how to use these things. And we have one question for you. Let's bring it up. Who's most to blame for the deterioration of public school buildings in Rhode Island? And there are your choices. Providence Journal's only giving you two choices. Pick your best of the two, as they say. $98 of you? Anybody missing? You did it. Good. Whoa. That's about an even split, I'd say. So let's start off with the first question. I'm going to address it to panel one. Those of you who have been paying attention on the Providence Journal, the overarching question is this idea of $250 million, $500 million, $2.2 billion. How could it cost so much is that panel's overarching question. But I'm going to ask Treasurer Magaziner, $2.2 billion. That's a lot. Billion. That's a B. $2.2 billion. It's a whole lot. How did we come up with this amount? what are we planning to spend, and how do we afford this?
Well, first of all, let me thank Mike and everyone at Leadership Rhode Island, everyone at the Providence Journal for sponsoring this event and for covering it. Linda Borg has done a terrific job covering the issue for the Journal, and of course our hosts at Rhode Island College. Every child in Rhode Island deserves to go to a school that is warm and safe and dry, full stop. And every child in Rhode Island deserves to go to a school that is equipped to help that child succeed in the 21st century. Unfortunately, today in Rhode Island, too many schools do not meet that standard, and in fact, fall woefully short. We are reaching a crisis point when it comes to the condition of our public school buildings. Just this past week, we had a ceiling collapse in a gymnasium at an elementary school in East Greenwich while there were 20 elementary school children inside. All right? This is, I think, the fourth ceiling collapse that we've had at a public school in Rhode Island in the last 5 years. This has reached a crisis point. We have school buildings that are unhealthy, unsafe for children to be in, and it's unacceptable. At a time when we are trying to recruit high-tech companies to move to Rhode Island, to expand to in Rhode Island, to hire in Rhode Island, we have high schools that do not have functioning science labs. We literally have students who graduate high school without ever seeing the inside of a science lab in 2018. So this issue came to a head last summer with the publication of something called the Jacobs Report. The Jacobs Report was the first time that RIDE, the Department of Education, sent a team of engineers from a firm called Jacobs Engineering, hence the Jacobs Report, sent a team of engineers into all 306 public school buildings in Rhode Island. And they cataloged the deficiencies that they found in each of those buildings. In total, across 306 school buildings, they found more than 50,000 deficiencies, some of them ranging from immediate health and safety needs, fire suppression systems that don't work, hazardous materials, mold, lead, asbestos, structural issues, others that were not necessarily health and safety issues, but were core to the ability of the schools to deliver on their mission, like science labs. The Jacobs Report estimated that the cost to repair all of those deficiencies today would be $2.2 billion. One note on the Jacobs Report, by the way, every single school district in Rhode Island was found to have at least one building with a significant health and safety deficiency. So this is not just a Providence problem, it is not just an urban problem. I mean, again, East Greenwich last week, every single school district has significant issues with the condition of their school buildings. So following the publication of the Jacobs Report, the governor convened a task force to come up with a plan. What are we going to do? I co-chaired the task force along with Ken Wagner, the education commissioner. We had a number of members representing cities and towns, the House and the Senate, school districts, teachers, the business community, the nonprofit world. We had experts in childhood welfare and safety. And after a very in-depth process and a very aggressive timeline, we came up with a series of recommendations in December to make a once-in-a-generation investment to repair and rebuild school buildings all across the state. Now, this plan all in would be about $1 billion over 5 years of total construction spending and $2.5 billion over 10 years. Every school district would be eligible for extra funding above what they're getting today as part of this plan. Now, the bonding that you mentioned is just one part of the funding. You know, this is such a big problem that the funding can't come from all one place, right? We have to pull different sources of funding together in order to make this work. But there's basically three legs to the funding. The first leg is the bonding. So $250 million would go to the voters for approval this year. That's a statewide bond. And then the task force recommended that a second $250 million bond go to the voters in 4 years. So that's one leg. That's $500 million. The second leg is continuing the existing practice of $80 million a year coming out of the state budget. So over 10 years, that would be another $800 million by continuing the budget appropriation as it exists today. And then the third leg of the stool would be a match from the cities and towns. And the match amount is a little difficult to estimate because it depends on which communities do the most work, but figure about another billion or so dollars over 10 years from the cities and towns. So that gets you to north of $2 billion over 10 years, which is not quite enough to fix the entire problem, but it puts a pretty big dent into it. And this would be the most significant investment that we have made in public school buildings in Rhode Island ever. So I know that there's another panel that will go more in depth into how those proceeds will be spent. So I'll just say, as far as the funding goes, 2 points. Number one, it is absolutely affordable. We have spent a lot of time looking at this, and this is something that the state can afford to do. The bonding, $500 million, it's a big number, but over the next 10 years, the state of Rhode Island has $1.4 billion of old debt coming off of our books. These are old bonds from 20-odd years ago that are finally being paid off. So $500 million of new bonding to fix our schools is only about a third of what is coming off of our books in that same period of time. That leaves plenty of room for us to make this $500 million investment in our schools and still reduce the overall indebtedness of the state and still bond for some other things like higher education, for example. So we can afford to do all three things. It's just like when you finally finish paying off your mortgage. We have a lot of old debt that's maturing that gives us some capacity. And then finally, really important point, if we wait, it gets more expensive. All right? The longer we wait, we can't let these buildings continue to fall apart. And the longer we delay, the more expensive it'll be to fix them. We went to Jacobs and we said, okay, Jacobs Engineering, at our current level of spending, because we already spend some on school construction, the state spends some and the districts are spending some, at our current rate of spending, what happens to the total condition, to the overall condition of our school buildings over the next 10 years? And Jacobs came back, they ran the numbers, and they said, okay, at your current level of spending, the total need would grow from $2.2 billion today to $2.9 billion 10 years from now. That means that at our current rate of spending, on average, the problem gets $70 million bigger every year. We're spending money now, but not enough to keep up. So the longer we wait to do this, the more expensive it'll be to fix these schools, and the more kids and teachers who will be going into schools every day that are unsafe and poorly equipped. So it's in our interest to do this and to do it quickly. We have a plan that is ambitious but also affordable, and we got to do it. It's what we owe to these students and to these teachers.
Great. Thank you, Treasurer. So we're going to go to get a bit of a context on panel 2, but before we do, we have another iClicker. We're front-loading all the iClicker questions. So get ready, and here we go. Do you trust the government to distribute, repair, and rebuild funds fairly and efficiently? $98 of you? Yeah, I think we can go. 99? Well, some people have a little distrust, but, Okay, so Kevin Gallagher on panel 2, and the treasurer talked a little bit about this, but I think you can add to this. So what's the formula? Which schools get what? I think, most people in their community say, hey, yeah, give me some of that money. I want to fix my schools. But how does the state view this, and how do you decide? Is there a formula for this? How does it work?
Thanks, Mike. That's a really great question and one that we get pretty regularly. As the treasurer mentioned, every school district has need. And on a day like today where it was raining so hard, if schools weren't on school break, you'd have many teachers putting buckets in the hallway to capture the rain as it was coming down. We have tons of leaky ceilings and HVAC systems that don't work, and the weather has taken its toll on our school buildings. And so we set out to design a plan that would help make sure that every city and town could benefit. There is a state statute right now that dictates how much money each community gets. It's a range from a low of 35% to a high of 96%, and it's based on a community's ability to pay at the local level. Under this proposal, we're proposing that every community receive a higher level of reimbursement from the state. Every individual city and town has the opportunity to participate. Every city and town is guaranteed by statute reimbursement from the state for their school construction projects. Every application that meets the requirements set forth in the RIDE regulations receives state reimbursement. The only way a city and town will not receive any money under the plan is if they don't apply for it. So take this year, for example. We had 9 school districts that went through the RIDE process from start to finish. That includes a new high school for East Providence, the consolidation of 2 elementary schools, and major renovations to 3 in Smithfield, projects in North Smithfield, Jamestown, North Kingstown, Warwick, and West Warwick. These applications don't compete with each other. Each one is reviewed on its own merits, and if it meets the requirements, it's guaranteed state reimbursement. Last year, 11 school districts fulfilled all of the requirements through the process, and all 11 were approved and received state funding. So the language in the budget article proposes that every city and town will get a portion of their construction project paid for by the state. Some of it will come up front in a pay-go format from the bond, and the rest will happen through a reimbursement process that happens already. So under this proposal, every single city and town can benefit. Every single city and town has a path to get the majority of the school construction costs paid for by the state. And really the only way you won't get any money is if you don't apply for it.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. We're going to move on to panel 3 to get a little context here. You have an iClicker question. Who should decide what kind of schools will be built? State Board of Education, local school committees, the governor, the General Assembly, and independent commission. Lots of choices this time. There we go. 99, 100. There we go. So, local school committees are above an independent commission, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so I thought before we got into the nuts and bolts and buildings and so forth, we really need to talk to an educator. And Susan Zoll and I were talking backstage about, what makes the optimal learning environment. So before we get down this road, what do we need to be considering? What's the best way to educate students? Susan?
Mike, so as an educator, we always like to start at the end. What are our outcomes? What do we hope for with this improvement in our schools? So outcomes, we want children to be more engaged. We want pre-K to 12 students who are attending more regularly. We want higher high school graduation rates. So if we want all of these things, environments definitely play a part in it. As a matter of fact, the recommendations from the Rhode Island School Building Task Force included that all schools will have 21st century learning environments, and they give a host of descriptions of what that would include. Dedicated science labs, modern equipment, science, technology, engineering, and the arts, STEAM-related programs. So we hear this term, we hear 21st century learning environments. Well, there's also 21st century skills that we want our pre-K to 12 students to have. And they include, we want them to understand and to be able to collaborate, to communicate, to be creative and innovative. And we want critical thinking and problem solving. And once again, the environments that we develop are going to help to develop these skills in our students. So when we think about our environments, of course we want them to be warm and safe, and we want them to have good air ventilation and acoustics and lighting. But there's this aspect around flexibility and creativity and engagement. This long-term goal of our having an innovative economy is going to be based on our students having an understanding of how to work together, how to collaborate, and so we need to create environments that promote students working in small groups and whole groups and spaces of their own to work in, as well as all of these other materials that they will need.
Excellent. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to come down to the audience. If you have a question, you raise your hand. I hold the microphone. You ask the question. I won't relinquish it, believe me. Some of you are used to that. And your questions should end in a question mark. So that means they're actually questions. And please, we're all neighbors here. No attacks on one another and so forth. But let's have a good discussion. And we've even encouraged the panelists to talk to each other throughout the night as well. And we'll start with our first question going to one of the Providence Journal journalists, either Linda or Wayne, if you'll throw that first question. You don't.
That's a good question, and we did look at it in the task force. First of all, just for context about how much we as a state have been underinvesting in our school buildings. Massachusetts dedicates 1% of their sales tax a year towards school construction. If we did the same thing in Rhode Island, the state would be spending north of $100 million a year. Instead, we've been spending the last few years $80 million a year, and before that, less during the period of a moratorium. So if we were doing what Massachusetts does, we would have been spending a lot more. That being said, on the task force, we looked at different potential funding streams, and we came to the conclusion that what works in some states may not necessarily be the best for other states. So in Rhode Island, with the fact that we were hit particularly hard in the recession and are still working on getting our economy moving again, we didn't feel that this was the time to either raise broad-based taxes or cut vital social services. But what we do have going for us in Rhode Island that probably other states out there wish they had is the fact that we have so much debt maturing over the next few years. And if we issued no other bonds, our level of indebtedness as a state would go from $1.8 billion today to less than $500 million 10 years from now. So that is something that we have going in our favor, and that we felt was appropriate to be the primary source of funding for our additional school construction needs over the next 10 years. So we absolutely looked at the Massachusetts model. We looked at what a lot of other states do in terms of funding their school facilities. But at the end of the day, we have to look at, in the Rhode Island context, what makes the most sense. The debt capacity that we have, the borrowing capacity that we have opening up over the next decade is a uniquely Rhode Island opportunity that we wanted to take advantage of, and we felt that it was preferable to a broad-based tax increase or cutting other services in the budget.
Thank you. You have a question?
Mike, do you want me to?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Linda, the only other thing that I would add is that Massachusetts uses a penny on the sales tax to fund statewide bonds, which is what we're proposing. Over the last 10 years, Massachusetts has done 7 statewide bonds for K-12 education. Rhode Island has not done a K-12 bond in more than 25 years. And so that shows you where Massachusetts has been investing its bond capacity and where we haven't been. And as the Treasurer said, we have a unique opportunity in November, if the General Assembly approves it, to start using some of our bond capacity to fix our schools.
Yes,
Can
go
I
ahead.
Jump in?
Yes.
One thing that in both the Treasurer and Kevin pointed out, in terms of Massachusetts dedicating a penny of their sales tax, which is 6.25%, I believe, 6.25% in Massachusetts, that generates somewhere in the vicinity of $800 million annually. It allows them, in a different context, of not having to go out with general obligation debt. So this past January, the Massachusetts School Building Authority issued over $400 million in bonds because they have a dedicated revenue stream. We're dependent upon this not only going through the legislature, but we all have to convince the voters that the $250 million is a good investment. And we would have to do that for the second half of the program. So the nice thing about having a revenue stream is that you can issue those bonds in a much more timely fashion. And it's much more advantageous to be able to negotiate rates in terms of the Moody's and Standard & Poor's in terms of being able to secure the debt with a lower interest rate.
Thank you for that clarification. I'll ask all the panelists, if you'll lean into that mic when you answer the questions. Our folks at home that are watching, and there are some, can't hear you so well. So if you could, please. Along those lines, so you had mentioned if the passes, okay, we're good to go. What happens if voters change their mind and priorities change and they're not interested in the second one?
Well, what happens is fewer schools will get fixed. I mean, that's why we got to do this. And, you know, I feel strongly that this is something that we should be prioritizing as a state. We haven't prioritized it in far too long. But we need to take our case to the voters and let people know that this is not a nice to have, this is a need to have. We have to fix these schools. We can't have kids going to school in buildings that are unsafe. I don't know, the lights are bright up here, but where's Lisa Nelson? Yeah, just a shameless plug here. Lisa is with the Fix Our Schools campaign, Fix Our Schools Rhode Island. She has a sign-up sheet out front for anybody who would like to get involved in this. Because we are hopeful that if this thing clears the General Assembly, we're going to go all the way to November, and we're going to need your help spreading the word and getting this thing passed. So if you'd like to get involved, talk to Lisa.
Wayne?
So let me take Mike's question a bit further. Let's assume that voters, we don't even get to the second bond. What happens this November if voters do not approve that bond? Is there a plan B?
What I would assume would happen is it would fall to local communities to continue to bond. For instance, Warwick has a $45 million proposal for school renovation in front of the legislature currently. They would have to convince...
Mr. Duffy, a little closer to that mic, please. Yeah.
They would have to convince their voters to make that adoption. So, I mean, if we don't have the statewide bond, what we will end up with is, I believe, the $10 million that's annually appropriated for the school building authority, and then it will be up to local communities to secure debt. And part of the problem, again, with that is that depending on how much debt they already have, they may not be able to convince their voters to incur more, or they may not even be able to convince their city council. School districts can't incur debt in the state of Rhode Island. It's the city or town that incurs the debt. So if this isn't passed, we're back to the way we've operated before, which is school districts ask their town council to renovate buildings or build new schools. They take it to RIDE signs off on the program. It then goes to the legislature, and the legislature puts it before the voters. And if the voters agree, then it's up to the city or town to secure the debt. And I think, as the treasurer will point out, the advantage of having the state take on the general obligation debt is that they can negotiate better rates in terms of their interest rates.
How does that play out on the ground, Mayor Alorza?
Yeah, if I can add to this just a little bit. If this bond doesn't pass at the state level, then it falls on the shoulders of the municipalities, but it makes it far less likely that the municipalities will be able to go forward and do their work. So we've done an assessment of the debt that we carry on our books over the next 10 years. And similar to the state, the city of Providence has about $400 million in school debt that is going to mature in the next 10 years. And so our plan is to borrow $400 million as those $400 million in debt mature, and to reinvest those in our schools. But those $400 million that we plan to reinvest into our schools already takes into account the reimbursement that we would be in line to receive from the state. So you take away that reimbursement, then it severely limits our ability to go out and bond. From the tune of investments of $400 million at the city level, perhaps that comes down to maybe $50 million of investments that we can make at the city level. So it's absolutely crucial that the state bond pass. If it doesn't pass and the burden does fall on the shoulders of the municipalities, then we're looking at broad-based, fairly across-the-board tax increases to be able to fund this, because I agree with the treasurer that this isn't something that we should do necessarily, it's something that we have to do. And the sooner we do it, the less expensive it'll be. The more we wait, the more difficult and more expensive it'll be. We've had this recurring cycle in the city of Providence, and I think it's fair to say in the state as well, where we don't invest into the regular repairs and maintenance that our infrastructure requires. And so our plan has been wait for things to break and then fix them. That's not a strategic way to do it. But now that we have a long-term plan for this at the state and at the city level, we can ask questions such as, well, what does education look like in the 21st century? Right? Do our classrooms look the same? Do we need smaller classrooms, larger class sizes? We can ask questions such as, how do we go all in on personalized learning? How does that change the environment? And so that's all to say that we can take back and take a strategic view to the repairs, maintenance, and infrastructure investments that we make, rather than simply ad hoc wait for something to break, and that determines what gets fixed first.
Yeah, how's that play out in Newport, Superintendent Germain? If the money doesn't come through, how's that affect Newport from your estimate?
As the mayor just stated, it would be up to the citizens of Newport then to decide, and then it would be up to the citizens of Newport to take on that debt. For us in Newport, we're in a quandary. We have not only a high school that needs to be renovated, it's probably the #1 high school in the state. We also have the other problem. I'll call it opportunity and challenge. It's a good problem to have. We're one of the communities in Rhode Island that have consolidated our elementary schools into one state-of-the-art elementary school that houses over approximately 900 children. Technology is first rate. You build it and they will come. We can't fit all the students in Newport. So I literally have my little ones, 3-year-olds to 5-year-olds, are in a Middletown elementary school. I'm renting from the town of Middletown because of the popularity. I believe that the education of today and the future is very different than it has been in the past. We now, with the use of technology and software systems that are adaptive to the needs and individual learning styles of children, enable those that are talented and bright to go further faster. And for those that need help and more interventions, we have that available as well. We know from industry and business partners that we need students that not only know their content area and they know their studies, but we also need students that attend school on a regular basis. That's the #1 thing the employers ask. I want to see their attendance record. #2, we know we need students that are able to think on their feet. They're able to get along with others, so they can sit in a meeting, they can sit in a boardroom, they can be creative. They can rethink how things have been done in the past and how we could possibly change it for the future. And they also have to be open-minded to those around us and to the future going forward. So I think, and I believe the student sitting next to me right here can fill you in on more, what we need for our future is very different. High school does not look the same as it does in the past. Students don't necessarily have to be on the campus during their diploma. We have students at Rogers High School because of P-TECH, for instance, are sophomores typically in a high school that are now attending CCRI. They will have an associate's degree and a high school diploma when they walk the stage. They also are involved in technical career pathways. They go out to the businesses. They learn different crafts, a lot of hands-on learning. Not necessarily, again, in a classroom that back in the dinosaur days, used to be in rows of desks. We now have tables. We now have the opportunity for students to sit at a table, talk with one another, work with one another, all of the above. So it's very different, and I believe our students should speak more into what they see and what they need for the future. But I want to go back to the first question. I think it's all of us for why the schools are where they are. I think we as a community and as a state, we have to, what are our values? What do we feel is needed the most? And as a kid that grew up, that's been working since she was 14, it was always education, the one thing no one can ever take away from you. It's important, and if you really want to do something, we have to value it. And it just depends upon how you look at how important education is.
Yeah, Amelia says, don't blame me, you know, I'm at school. What does classical high school look like today, Amelia?
Well, I'll just start off by saying when I applied or when I took the classical test, I was told classical is going to be transformative, it's going to be amazing, it's going to be it's the best school, the only option. It was pretty much formatted as the only option I had, and I was so excited. And then you walk into the building and it just automatically feels like a prison. And I realized the school was built so long ago, and that's the way that the buildings back then were made. But as you mentioned earlier, 21st century skills are the way it is now. It's so much different than how it was before, and the environment is so important to, a positive environment is really conducive to a positive learning experience. And you walk into the schools and we have indoor swimming pools because there are just puddles of water everywhere because everything is falling apart. We don't have ceilings. The ceilings don't work. When it rains, certain stairwells have to be closed off because they get so flooded. And it feels dark and gloomy, and it's just not a positive environment to be in, and it makes learning not fun. It makes learning not engaging, and it's really, really can be depressing sometimes to have to walk into the building and know that you're going to be sitting in a really dark classroom, and there's no guarantee that the desk that you sit in that day might not break from under you, because you see it happen maybe every couple of months. Someone's desk just breaks from under them, and it's really, it makes going to school and learning not engaging and not fun and not exciting. So.
Yeah, and Amelia's not just speaking from her own experience. You know, she's with Young Voices, and they push, advocate for yourself, but also speak on behalf of others. And so a lot of other students have told her, please say this, please say that. So how's it look over in North Kingstown, Colin? Let's stick with this with the students for a second so we can get a feel for this.
Well, so I'm lucky, you know, North Kingstown, it's one of the newest schools built in Rhode Island. It's beautiful, you know, a lot of windows and natural light. And, you know, schools like Classical definitely, I feel, take priority over, you know, luckier school districts like North Kingstown. But, you know, I think really just the one big issue that we have in North Kingstown is we don't have any AC in a classroom that is not a computer lab. And so that makes the months of like September to October, and then from about May till June, almost unbearable. You know, it's a 3-story school, so the 3rd floor is no ventilation, there's no AC, and I have routinely gone to last period English class, which was I had last year, and there was a thermometer in the classroom. It routinely said 90 degrees. And you'd open the windows, it wouldn't matter because it was 90 degrees outside. Yeah, you never get a breeze because the school literally was built with no ventilation. It was built with the intention of having AC, and then while building the school, they ran out of money, so they said, all right, well, what can we scrap? They chose the AC. And so it makes, you know, a difficult 4 months of learning because you can't get much work done when you're dripping sweat onto the paper you're trying to write on.
All right, I've got a question from the audience. Please state your name and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Mark Streisand. I'm a resident of Pawtucket, and my kids go to private school out of, I think, necessity. My question to you is going back to you, Secretary Magaziner. What are you guys doing to get the word out that we need this bond to pass? I understand that there's no plan B. Yeah. You know, we're in a tight situation. But I would assert we have, I don't know, 110 people here maybe. You know, the weather affects a lot of people. So now there's 200 people that are not here that were supposedly supposed to be here that would be your advocate. Now they're not. You know, the weather's not the only thing that causes people not to want to participate. And I own 2 businesses here in the state, one in Newport and one in Providence. As a corporation, it's always a challenge to say, wow, I want another bond. I want to pay more money. I want to pay more taxes. So I'm with you. I'm willing to bite the bullet. I know this is a need, mandatory. I'm a public school kid. My kids are very fortunate that we can afford to send them, but there's a lot of people that aren't. And, you know, quite honestly, I call Hope High School Beirut because it just looks like a prison to what you said. But I pass it every single morning, and I feel for these children that have to go to school there because it just doesn't look safe. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, you said you're from Pawtucket, and one of the, I think, best and most inspiring stories of what's possible with a school building is actually in Pawtucket, the Potter Burns Elementary School. Potter Burns is a 100-year-old building. It was one of those buildings where the ceiling fell in a classroom about 4 years ago. It's actually a funny story. The teacher in that classroom took pieces of the ceiling and put them in an envelope and sent them to the mayor of Pawtucket, Mayor Grebian. And lo and behold, they renovated the school. But this school is beautiful now, very much like the Pell School in Newport. State-of-the-art school. They just moved back in this year. It's not only is it clean and bright and it has the best technology, but absenteeism, student absenteeism is down 15%. Discipline issues are down. Performance is up. There's a real connection between the quality of the buildings and learning outcomes. And so your question is, how do we get people on board with the program and how do we get this thing done? The answer is by sharing stories. So, you know, even though I know I'm a very compelling and charismatic speaker when I talk like numbers and facts and figures and interest on debt and all of that, the thing that's really
Who told him his reputation?
The thing that's really going to convince people is stories from students, stories from parents, stories from teachers, both good and bad. The bad stories. Here's what I have to put up with in my classroom that is freezing cold where I can't pay attention during class. Or, you know, I'm a 6th grade teacher and all of my students have Chromebooks and we're supposed to teach coding, but my classroom only has one electrical outlet for 30 Chromebooks, right? Like stories like that that are tangible, and good stories too, like the Potter Burns School, you know, success stories that show what a difference a good school building can make. So I think by telling stories person to person, by using social media and getting these stories out, that's how we'll convince people. So again, I will plug Fix Our Schools RI, the Fix Our Schools campaign, which is on social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Check it out. Go on social media and look. What we're really trying to do there, again, is share the stories. Because if you don't have a child in the public school system or you don't work in the public school system, chances are you're not going into the schools. You don't have a reason to go in. So you don't know how bad it is, but you also don't know how good it can be. But I think at the end of the day, that's how we're going to get this done, is by having people who are living and working in that reality every day, sharing those stories.
Before we take a question from the Providence Journal journalist, subscribing to the Journal, I hear, helps. Yes, go ahead.
Mike, can I just comment on
yeah,
this
go ahead,
briefly?
Mayor.
That I agree with the treasurer in that, you know, in Providence we have this principle that animates everything that we do, which is people support what they help to create. And it's a bit of a truism, and it's very basic, but I believe it's deep and very true. And what we've done over the past year and change is we've engaged our residents through what we call the All-In Education Summit. So last year, right about 12 months ago, we invited the entire community, and we had about 400 people spend an entire day with us talking about our schools. And we had a number of different topic areas that sort of bubbled to the surface as priorities. One of the top issues was school infrastructure. And what's interesting about this is that the entire summit and the 400 people who participated, all of the sessions were prepared and facilitated by our students in the Providence Public Schools. And so we heard the stories directly from them. And there's nothing more compelling than hearing it directly from the students than hearing it from us, frankly. So that's one impact that it had. But from that session, we kick-started this 1.5-year-long process where, through a series of phases, we're going to envision what our schools can look like and then go through the very detailed steps to make sure we make it a reality. And what that does is not only engages people in the process, but it also creates this accountability and transparency tool. If we're hearing directly from the community that they want to see X, and we're not delivering X, well then, we're putting ourselves out there directly accountable to the folks in a way that we will hear directly from them. So I agree with the treasurer that the students' voices and teachers' voices, frankly, have to lead the conversation. But on top of that, there's a lot that we can do as a community to engage people in the process so that they feel personally invested. If we go through this first bond and it doesn't get done right, then that second bond, there's no chance it is going to pass. So it's incumbent upon all of us that we engage the community, do it right, so that then when we come back 5 years from now, the voters will once again approve.
May I say something?
Yes.
I think the other thing we have to do, too, is public schools should be where we want to send our children, not have to think about an alternative for our children. And when we've come to a point in time where people are now thinking that way, we need to reflect upon that and say, what are we going to do about that? And how do we make it change for the better? Because every child that grows up in the state of Rhode Island should have the opportunity and shouldn't have to, nor their families have to worry about, where is my child going to go to school? So I think that's something we have to, and I have to as a public school kid myself, and also as a superintendent of public schools. Public schools are great, but we also need to reflect upon why are we in this state right now. Thank you.
I just want to respond to the mayor.
Go ahead, Susan.
I agree with you, Mayor, and I think that if we want to get it right, one of the components that's not listed anywhere, I've been doing lots of research trying to prepare for today, but one of the things that's not listed is an evaluation post-occupancy of these new or improved buildings. Do we know much what we were just hearing Seth say? Do we know that students are coming to school more? Do we know that there's a higher graduation rate? So this isn't just a pre and post evaluation, but this is longitudinal to see about whether what we're doing to the environment is making a difference. And I think that's also another way to tell our constituents that here's the information that you wanted. Here's your investment, and we know this is what happened with pre-K to 12 outcomes because of this investment. So this post-occupancy evaluation, quantitative, qualitative feedback from students, did the environments that we created, did they work? Did they meet your needs when you walked into classical? And was it everything that you had hoped for?
Thank you, Susan. Wayne, you have a question, and then I'm going to head back into the audience for a couple in a row, I think.
Thank you. I don't think there's any question that you can design and build buildings that last for 50 years or more. What I think you've heard from panelists, from the superintendent, talking about, and from Susan, talking about the changes in teaching and learning and in pedagogy, facilities going forward need to be adaptable. They need to be able to respond to the needs of the students and respond to the needs of society and the business community at large. You know, the jobs that exist today, I forget the exact statistic, but 10, 15 years ago, over half of them didn't exist. That's how fast the business world is changing. So we need buildings that can respond to that. The term classroom, I think, is archaic. It's teaching and learning environments, and as Susan indicated, it's a variety of different environments, again, adaptable to the needs of the particular subject that's being taught. And I even hesitate to say taught because the process going forward may become student-led inquiry-based learning. And so schools need to have the ability, and part of their adapting is to, rather than being the place where a child goes for 7 hours a day for 32 weeks a year for 12 or 13 years, it's a place where everyone goes over their lifetime whenever they want to collaborate, research, just learn in different ways, pursue their areas of interest though, whatever those areas of interest may be professionally or educationally if they're younger.
I have a question from the audience here.
Hi, Janice Ruggieri. I'm from Cranston. I'm actually on the school committee in Cranston. Actually, I have two questions. One of them is there going to be any oversight if the cities and towns are expected to fund or partially fund budget-wise for schools, that it's actually getting done? We, in our experience, we had a bond that was voted on and approved by the public, and the funds were not released for 11 years. And by the time the funds were released, the project could not be completed as it was originally planned for, and it was science labs for middle schools because the costs had gone up so high during those 11 years. And then the second piece would be for any capital improvement budgets that have been put forth, there's no trigger for a city and town to be forced to put money aside for school improvements and things like that. So my first question is oversight for local cities and towns if they're going to be partially responsible for funding this project. The second piece is long term, after this first bond passes, which we hope it will, moving forward, is there a plan or even some kind of outline of a plan for this to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that we don't find ourselves back in this state?
So let me take a crack at that. For your first question, look, we believe that, and I say we, I mean the task force, we believe that the decisions for which schools to repair, which schools to replace, which schools to consolidate, et cetera, all of these decisions have to be local decisions. Like the mayor said, they have to be local decisions with local stakeholder feedback. And so the state is not going to come in and say, you have to do this one first, or you have to combine these two. Or, like, these should be local decisions. And so I think, I don't know the particulars of the issue in Cranston that you raised, but it sounds like there was some local issues there that prevented the will of the voters from being carried out. That being said, the whole thing we're trying to do here is to incentivize cities and towns to do more projects faster. In order to get ahead of the curve and reverse this trend where the need goes up every year and the condition of our buildings gets worse every year, what we're basically saying to the cities and towns is, whatever projects you do, if you do them in the next 5 or 6 years, the state is going to pay extra. So the state is going to pick up to 20% extra if, and this is an important if the project starts in the next 5 or 6 years. So we're trying to say to the cities and towns, okay, you might have a 10-year plan or a 15-year plan for what you're going to do with your school buildings. We want you to do them in the next 5 years. We want you to do it now. We're not going to force you to do it. We're not going to say, that you're required to spend your local money on that if you don't want to. But we're going to incentivize you to do it faster by saying the state's going to pick up a lot, a significant amount of additional cost of the project if you do it sooner. So if you're doing a $50 million project and the state's going to pick up an extra 20%, that's $10 million that the municipality won't have to spend if you move quickly. So we're trying to incentivize that fast action. And then to your second question about what happens after the fact and how do we make sure that we don't end up in this same situation again 15 or 20 years from now, one thing that we are recommending is the introduction of statewide facility standards. Right now in Rhode Island, there's no statewide standard for occupancy for a school building. There's no statewide standard that says if your building is, you know, so bad that it reaches certain, you know, a certain level of deterioration, you're not allowed to house kids in that anymore. We recommend that RIDE phase in those minimum standards over the next several years, and that's the stick, right? We're offering a carrot, which is more funding to fix these schools, but then there's a stick that says, from then on, if you don't keep your schools in good condition, the state reserves the right to come in and basically shut that building down until you fix it. And you know, we feel that that is fair and it's necessary for the safety of the kids.
Does anyone on the panel here have an answer about, you know, and when she mentioned the misuse of funds in Cranston, I saw a lot of heads. I don't know if they're all in Cranston, but a lot of people, no use of funds. Did anyone up here say, how does that work? I mean, how does that last for 11 years? And is there any concern that that could happen again? Or the new rules say it's got to be done in 5 years, therefore we can never have that happen?
Well, I think based on the $250 million bond issue and the language associated with that won't likely happen. Almost annually, when you take a look at the supplemental budget that the governor introduces, frequently there's RIDE is giving back money, and they aren't actually giving back money. It's bond money that was never accessed, so the reimbursement rate was never delivered. That's the problem. Municipalities have the fiduciary responsibility to carry debt. School districts do not. So I'm not familiar with the specific examples in Cranston, but I'm assuming that there was some dispute or there was a change in administration or the council changed and they arbitrarily said we're not going to spend the money. And I don't know how you get around that unless you empower schools to be the fiduciary agents for the bond, and that is a lot more complicated.
Mayor?
So for anyone who may not be familiar the way that the city and state funding works, the way it has worked up until this point is that the municipalities typically borrow but invest the dollars into school infrastructure and then get reimbursed a certain percentage from the state. So, for example, the city of Providence gets reimbursed 83% for every dollar that we invest into our school building. So it behooves all of us, frankly. If the $250 million gets approved, we want to get out the gate, have shovel-ready projects so we can take advantage of this reimbursement rate. Because if we're not ready to go, we're simply leaving money on the table. And I know that there are a lot of other cities and towns and school committees that will be ready to do that work. So I think it'd be foolish to borrow the money but then not actually use it.
Linda?
Just quickly on a follow-up
go
to
ahead.
that, Providence has the ability to issue revenue bonds and revenue bonds for school construction. The other 38 cities and towns have to go to general obligation debt. So they have to go to the voters to get that approved. And I believe the council approves the general revenue issuances in Providence. So it's a little bit different. They have the ability to issue revenue bonds for school construction where other cities and towns have to secure general obligation debt.
Yeah, Linda Borg?
So my question is, say we spend the 250 or the 500 million over the next 5 years, what guarantees are there that districts will keep up the maintenance? Because we all know the reason we got here is 3 decades or 4 decades of little to no maintenance. Anyone can jump in.
So the legislation that's been put in does prescribe statewide maintenance standards. So RIDE would promulgate a set of standards for what maintenance looks like statewide. Here's how often you should check your filters. Here's how often you should check the roof. Like an actual checklist that all cities and towns would have to follow. Yeah, because I gotta tell you, the having spent the last several months traveling around to different schools, school facilities directors in Rhode Island are amazing. Like they are just wizards. They find ways to hold these buildings together with no funding and no resources. Like some of these buildings are being held together with like scotch tape and bubble gum and spit. But everyone's doing it differently. and there isn't necessarily any statewide assurance that best practices are being followed. So there is in the legislation a requirement for RIDE to promulgate those statewide maintenance standards. There's also been a lot of debate and discussion around whether school districts should be required to set aside a certain amount of funding for each building for maintenance. That continues to be a hot issue. I personally support that. I know there are others that do not. But at the very least, there does seem to be consensus around the statewide maintenance checklist. So I expect that at the very least that will go forward, if not some sort of a spending requirement too.
So I know what you're thinking. Kate Bramson works at the Journal. She doesn't anymore. She's an audience member. Please stand up.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So I hear some urgency, but as I listen to Amelia and Colin and see that there are students in high school now who need new buildings, I'm curious, when the districts get ready to go ahead and build, when might students who perhaps are in high school already, when might they see new buildings? Are we talking about a 5-year timeline to build each project that's approved, or do we think, perhaps the man from Gilbane could answer, do we think a school building can be built in 1 year? When might we see new schools here?
So I'll let Bill talk about the construction timelines typically, but some of our students are going to see new buildings very soon, sooner than you think. Mayor Lombardi is here from North Providence, and they have already embarked on a project to build 2 new elementary schools. So the timeline is really going to be something that's dictated at the local level. RIDE has an annual process, so every year districts can come forward. I think the average time frame from RIDE approval to when the building opens is about 2 years. That's really new construction or major renovations. A lot of work can happen as quickly as the summer if districts come forward with shovel-ready projects.
So to Kevin's point, there's a variety of scenarios that you can experience. If it's a matter of some immediate health and safety work, let's say it's a new roof, the process to go through the securing of a design firm and doing that design and going through a RIDE approval process and having that project approved and then implemented is much faster than when you're trying to build a new school building for, 400 or 500 elementary students or the better part of 1,000 high school students. Those projects can be 3 or 4 years in duration when you include the planning process, because as I said before and as others have commented, education in the future is not the education of the past. We can't continue to build the same buildings. So the local communities, if they're going to be involved in these decisions, as they should be, there's a whole community engagement process. There's a whole education and awareness process for them. They need to clearly understand the evolution of teaching and learning and what students need. And then they can make informed decisions about what they want their schools to be in their communities.
Go ahead, Colin.
So in response to the urgency of the conditions of the school, I think it is one of the most urgent. Maybe not me, since I'm graduating high school next year, but for the students in some of the lower grades, they're going to be the future of the United States. They will be running the government when everyone in the crowd is retired, and they'll be, the potential president of the United States could be sitting in that classroom, and you're depriving them the education that they deserve, and because the classroom is not adequately heated or adequately dry, or it's not adequately to the state-of-the-art 21st century learning environment. So yeah.
Yes, sir. Please stand up. Tell us your name and your question, sir. I'm holding it.
My name's Doral Beasley. I live in South Kingstown. Our town is going through this process right now, and we actually, the school committee hired another firm to look at our schools during the same period of time that you guys were doing your Jacobs report work. And what we found with the Jacobs report was it didn't totally give us an answer for what our schools need. In other words, the warm, safe, and dry is basically the Jacobs report, fixing your infrastructure in your school, your physical plant, leaking roofs and whatever, but it doesn't really provide you with the funds to change the interior structure of your schools and add labs like a STEAM lab or STEM lab. So we found that beside $65 million or whatever we're going to need to fix the problems from the Jacobs report for our schools that we're going to keep open, we're probably going to need the same amount of money to put those, to change the infrastructure and the rooms and the interiors of the high school and the junior high and like our elementary schools. So it's like double the money.
Who would like to respond to that concern about the interior?
I think that this issue about getting schools to warm, safe, and dry is just incredibly important, and just as important is the question that the issue and the question that you just raised, sir. So take, for example, education is changing so much right now. You know, we come from perhaps an entire century where teachers would stand at the front of class and be the content knowledge experts and the teachers, to a place right now where the role of teacher is evolving. It's becoming more of the facilitator of learning. And they have access to online learning tools, and the teachers can facilitate their learning so that they can pursue their interests and their passions in very different ways, but it's personalized for the individual. So if that's 21st century learning, then how does that change the actual physical layout of our classrooms? That's one question that we have the opportunity to answer here. Another major issue that we have in the city of Providence, and I know through school districts throughout the state, is the increasing needs of social and emotional learning supports for our kids inside of our schools. And so how do we build these supports physically into our school buildings so that these wraparound services can be provided right there in the same place? We've talked about science lab and how do we promote STEAM education, how do we promote arts education. A couple of things that we're also looking to continue doing here in Providence is how do we integrate our recreation centers into our schools so that, again, there's a seamless transition from school hours to after school hours. It's the same kids. Can they be served in that same space? And then while we're at it, let's get creative. Sure, the main sort of goal and purpose behind this is how do we improve K through 12 education for our young people, but does it really make sense to have our schools entirely occupied during the day but entirely unoccupied during the evenings? Can our evenings be our community centers? Can the schools be our community centers during the evening? Perhaps can they be places where the community takes workforce development and professional development classes during the evening? So these are all absolutely critical questions that we should be asking and answering throughout this process, because if we don't find answers to those questions, then we're missing this once-in-a-generation opportunity to get this right.
And if I could, in South Kingstown, you're a 35% community right now, so currently the state covers 35% of the cost of your school projects. Under this plan, you would be eligible for up to 55%, so potentially a 20% increase in the amount of costs that the state would pick up. So it would be a really significant benefit to the town of South Kingstown.
I'm interested in hearing, because in preparing for this question came up. Given the security concerns that we have across America, fortunately nothing has gone awry in Rhode Island, and knock on wood it won't. But given the security concerns, are they taken in account in construction today? And does it differ or conflict with the environment that you need to have for the best learning environments? I'm really looking at Susan and Mr. Bryan to sort of mull that one over for me. Susan and I talked about this a little bit.
So I just returned from a conference, the Association for Learning Environments, and we had an evening session. There's about 30 or 40 of us, and we spent 2 hours talking about the security issue. It's been an evolving and emerging issue over time, but more recent events have certainly elevated it. excuse me, there are challenges to creating a teaching and learning environment that meets the expectations of first responders, because you don't want the interior of a school to look like a prison, and it can't be organized that way. So the basic approach that's being used today, there's two elements to it. One is the approach to the building, various ways of doing soft protection. Now that works more in suburban communities than in urban communities, where you can create physical but natural barriers so that people have difficulty approaching a building, and so that you funnel people to a certain location. But the main focus is to make security transparent, and that way it's not as it doesn't impact the kids and the staff in a negative fashion. So, candidly, ballistic glass, it's being used everywhere now. It's extremely expensive. It's not in anyone's cost models today for school construction. But ballistic glass is used exclusively at points of entry, main points of entry around main entrance areas. And we're talking ballistic glass that can take the impact of some of the automatic assault rifles that have been so prominent in the news. The question is, how far do you go with it from there? Do you do all of your first level, ground level glass and glazing? There are folks in the urban communities that are concerned about strangers, or maybe not strangers, as other family members, extended family members, approaching a building and peering in windows that are at ground level. We had a recent conversation, it was actually in North Providence, the mayor was there, and there was conversation about, can they raise the window sill height up higher off the sidewalk so people can't look in? The answer is no, not if you want to be funded by, not if you want to qualify for state funding, because RIDE regulations require compliance with Northeast CHIPS, which is research-based best practices for teaching and learning environments, and you need to have vision level glass for students in a classroom. And the reason for that is, A, it's natural light, but B, there's also research that tells us that if a student's doodling on a piece of paper versus just glancing out a window for a few moments, that's more distracting to them than glancing out the window. They can continue to acquire knowledge, and they may just be thinking about what they're acquiring, right, if they glance out the window versus doodling on a piece of paper. So anyways, those are some of the key aspects. There's shooter detection systems that some districts are exploring putting in. Those track a shooter when they're in the building. They can be linked to camera systems. They can be linked to first responders. It's scary stuff, but what you don't want to do, I don't want to see it. You don't want to change the teaching and learning environments that need to be open, engaging, collaborative, inspiring spaces. You just can't shut them down.
And I'd like to offer an alternative to that, and I think it kind of goes along with what the mayor was suggesting. So on Friday, Child Trends is an organization in Washington, D.C., and they released a letter that they had sent to the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, and they made 3 recommendations based on their 40 years of research. And so they included, and forgive me, I will read because I have not memorized these. Anchor your work in the knowledge of trends in school safety over the last 2 decades. Prioritize approaches that will help schools prevent school shooting, not merely defend against them. And examine how recent school discipline initiatives have complemented the goal of improved school safety. So one of the points that was brought up, which was rather surprising, because we hear it so much in the news, it feels like there's more violence. And yet this report says from 2000 to 2015 that school-associated youth homicides neither increased nor decreased, that youth behavior, risk behavior, had shown a marked improvement, where weapons carrying had actually dropped. And not to dismiss the tragedies that we're actually hearing, but things are improving. And one of the ways that we do that, rather than trying to think, do we need bulletproof glass in the front, what are we doing within the building? Environments can also offer feelings of inclusion. What is the social emotional piece that we are doing to make our students feel welcome in the schools, to feel part of it? Some of the data said, at the school level, the report identifies the following factors as key predictors of violence: negative school climate, lack of school connectedness, involvement in bullying, perpetration, or victimization, association with antisocial peers, low school performance. All of these things are really embedded in our children's social emotional well-being, and schools, teachers, administrators, the environment in which they are housed, all play a role in this.
Go
Mike,
ahead,
I would
Kevin.
just add that I think the audience was, one of the first questions you asked them was who should be making these decisions, and I think more members of the audience picked school committees than any other category, and we absolutely agree. These decisions are going to be made at a local level. I think the panelists pointed out some really important considerations that each city and town is going to have to think through as they're making decisions about what's right for them. We know from the Jacobs report that many of our school buildings have windows that can't be secured, intercom systems that don't work, emergency exits that are sealed off. And so when we talk about warm, safe, and dry, this is a big piece, the safety piece. The proposal that's in front of the General Assembly and that we hope to put in front of the voters would provide every district with more resources to improve the safety and security of their buildings. How they do it and what decisions get made will continue to be local ones, and ones that I think should be informed by some of the comments that the panelists have made.
Thank you.
In response to the recent tragedies and various school shootings that we've had recently, North Kingstown High School has, made it an initiative to go and try and make, North Kingstown High School a safer place. And one of the new policies that they had, installed in our everyday activities is the locking of every single classroom door, even during passing time, which in my mind is illogical because we are locked in the school. At 7:15, all the doors in the school are locked, and the only way in is through the main office where there's a camera and an intercom system to get into the school. So the locking of classrooms really only just interrupts the school day and adds for the teachers got to go over and unlock the door, and I feel like there should be more of a focus on the beginning of the school day, because I think the most dangerous time to be in a school is at arrival when students are coming, because for NK we have 1,500 students that are coming in between 6:45 and 7:15 in the morning, and it is very easy to have someone with bad intentions easily work their way in the crowds and gain access to the school, and then carry out with whatever they may have been planning. And so rather than making safety precautions towards like the safety of the students during the school day, I feel like there should be more precautions towards before the school day. What can we do to screen people as they're coming in possibly, or make sure that they're actually students that are coming into the building, because there's I think 4 entrances and doors that are just open. You walk up and open the door, and so anyone with a gun, with a knife, or with any intention can just walk into the school for half an hour.
Amelia, would you like to add from your perspective? Yeah.
Yeah, in regards to school security, one thing that I really, really want to highlight is that students don't want their schools to feel like military zones or to feel like prisons. We want schools to still be an open environment, especially in schools that are mainly low-income youth of color. We already feel threatened by cops who are sort of patrolling the areas all the time, and it feels intimidating. And in my middle school, I remember there was a cop all the time, and I felt at any given moment like I was in trouble just because he was standing there. And that's one thing I really, really want to highlight, is that we don't want our schools to be crawling with cops. So when it comes to school security, that's one thing we really, really want to stay away from. So.
Thank you. We have a question from Twitter. Whitman?
This question's from Erin Hall. With so many options for students' choice where they attend school, should we be fixing all existing Rhode Island schools or consolidating into regional schools so students can take advantage of more options and resources in their districts?
It's a really good question, and I think the treasurer can probably add some of the discussion that took place at the task force on this. We, just like school security and safety issues, believe that those decisions are local, but we do want to incentivize them, because one of the findings of the Jacobs report was that we have too many school buildings, and too many of them are in a state of disrepair. A great example of what's possible when you think about doing newer and fewer, which is what the proposal talks about, is what Newport did, and I know that the superintendent can speak more to that. Mayor Lombardi's here, and they're doing the same thing in North Providence, consolidating into a smaller footprint where you can provide a newer school for students and potentially take some existing buildings offline. Just this year, we have proposals in front of RIDE right now for multiple districts, including Smithfield and North Smithfield, who are considering doing the same thing that Newport and North Providence are doing. So we do believe that there's a big opportunity to consolidate. We are trying to incentivize that by providing additional levels of reimbursement for communities who do consolidate. But those decisions are really local decisions and need to be made at the local level.
Yeah, Mr. Duffy, do you see that sort of, is that a trend that perhaps there'll be more cooperation and ways to work together?
There are, within the school district itself, the movement is towards consolidating schools. One of the problems in terms of consolidating multiple school districts is that we have a home rule charter article in our state constitution. In any regionalized school district that in the state, it necessitated a vote of the two communities to merge the school systems. So Bristol-Warren was as a result of a referendum. I always point to Pontiac High School. Pontiac Middle School and Pontiac High School, the voters in Foster and Gloucester agreed to consolidate those two schools. They have separate elementary schools. They can't get together and consolidate the entire school system. I think it's 5 schools, 3 in one community, 2 in the other, and the voters have steadfastly refused to endorse the merging of those schools. So part of the problem when people say, we're a small state, why don't we just have like 3 or 4 big school systems? You can't do it. Article 13 of our Constitution essentially says to get to that level, the voters have to pass on it. And in the past, they haven't. I grew up in Pawtucket and went to Pawtucket schools. There was a proposal to merge them with Central Falls schools over 20 years ago. It failed. The voters of Pawtucket said no. The voters of Central Falls said yes. So while you can encourage intra-district consolidation, the ability to merge school districts throughout the state is very limited.
Yeah, was there any consideration to incentivize that via the state money and how you're incentivizing other things?
Well, we did have regionalization bonuses, and that was the incentive for Bristol-Warren. It was the incentive for Exeter West Greenwich, Pontiac, to regionalize. Cherahoe, I believe in Cherahoe, even though they got the regionalization bonus, Charleston voted over a decade ago to disassociate itself with the regional school district, but there's no way they can physically or governmentally figure out how to do that. So we had a regionalization bonus. That was eliminated when we adopted the funding formula in 2010.
Yeah, so under the new plan, there is incentive for consolidation of buildings, as Kevin alluded to. So on top of the normal state reimbursement, the state would pick up an additional 5% of the cost for any consolidation of buildings, whether that happened within a district or across districts. Again, these are decisions that should be made at the local level. The state is not going to micromanage, but we know that statewide, some degree of consolidation does make sense, so we do want to incentivize it. I'm a product of the Bristol-Warren schools. They actually regionalized while I was a student there. I think it's been a success story there, but every community has to make the decision that's right for them.
Yeah, Superintendent, I hate to leave you out. How about Newport? Any consideration there?
So it's a community decision. It's and similar to what happened in other districts, both districts vote, and people tend to move and live in a community for a certain reason. And I've found after working in most of the East Bay districts and up here in Providence, people live where they live and they want their children to attend the schools in the district. It's a very sensitive topic, especially for neighboring communities. And there's perceptions about school systems, whether one's good or bad versus the other. So people vote accordingly on their perception of a school district. I will say with the right initiatives that are now going on, zip code is fading more and more. Children have the opportunity anywhere in any district to attend any school if they are interested in a certain pathway that their own school district does not offer. So the little hitch right there is the transportation, and I believe the Department of Ed and the Commissioner are working on that. But to the point about joining with other school districts, I'll take Aquidneck Island as an example. People live in certain communities. They have very strong ties to those communities, and I believe Rhode Island, the independent man, is not on the top of that dome for just any old reason. Everyone has their own way of thinking about where they want to live and what schools they want their children to go to.
Bill, did you have something to add?
Yes, and I think the superintendent touched on my basic point, is that along the lines of CTE programs, students can have choice. And perhaps it's not a consolidation for the reasons that Mr. Duffy explained, but I think going forward, school districts will have the opportunity to explore more collaboration, because I'll give you an example of a geographically large school district in Virginia that recently went through a planning, strategic planning process, and they were envisioning building a 4th comprehensive high school. And as they went through that process, their consultants and their team came back to the board and said, you know, we've decided we don't need to build a 4th comprehensive school. What we need to do is to create centers of excellence that each have a focus, and they're redesigning their transportation system to be spoke and hub. So anyone in that district can attend any one of those centers. And these centers are relatively small, 40, 50,000 square feet. They're putting some of them in mixed-use buildings, and they're intentionally designing them as open floor plates so that they are adaptable. They're going to subdivide them in some fashion, but they don't know what that fashion is, and they don't want to do it in a way that won't be easy to change going forward. This district is quite innovative. They've moved away from, they've received permission to go away from Carnegie units formally with their core curriculum, but they're still teaching the subject, the content material. They're just using different methods for students to do it. And they run their programs from 7 o'clock in the morning until 5:30 in the evening. Some kids don't come to school until 10:30 because they have other obligations within their family units.
So I'm just going to put this out to the audience. This is all about change. And this is a completely different way of thinking for every taxpayer in every community. Because when children start to make choices and when families become aware that their children have opportunities to attend school in other areas, the zip code will start to fade away. And then the community in which one lives must pay the tuition to the district the child attends. So for a superintendent, it can be a nightmare. And for a school committee, it can be a nightmare in the sense of budgeting. Because choice will enable children to go wherever their passions or wherever they feel is best for their own learning experience. And all of us are going to have to try to figure out a way, especially from a local perspective. If you have a lot of children that are interested in a program, your school system may decide, well, you know, we have so many children that are interested in these STEAM and STEM opportunities. We need to start looking at what we're doing in our own district. But those kind of things, I believe all of us need to start thinking about.
I have a question from the audience here. Hannah?
I have a question about whether, in conjunction with hopefully the passage of this bond and the spending of that money, there will be an effort to update the RIDE standards for reimbursement. I'm from Barrington. We're building a new middle school. The allowable reimbursement rate for us is based on numbers that were promulgated 10 years ago. So they have nothing to do with today's construction costs, and yet that's the basis on which we're reimbursed by the state for our building. So I would think it would be a necessary joint effort to revisit those and bring them up to date at the same time that we're talking about a new system for reimbursement.
The quick answer to your question is yes. I believe that the department is going to put out all of their regulations back out for public comment. The Jacobs report identifies some ways to improve it. The legislation that's in front of the General Assembly right now, if it passes, would require some changes. The reason why RIDE has guidelines to quantify how much money should be spent on schools is really a protection of the taxpayers. You see in Massachusetts, they have very, very similar rules as Rhode Island. In fact, our regulations are modeled after the regulations that Massachusetts had at the time. They do need to be updated, but they are intended to protect the taxpayers from one community deciding to spend a lot of money above and beyond what is necessary and putting all of us on the hook to pay a percentage of that. Agreed.
There have also been some comments from the panelists regarding the function of schools beyond just teaching and learning, and that they be centers for the community and have the capacity to support students beyond traditional educational needs. You need to support the whole child, in particular in urban communities, but not exclusively in urban communities. Those problems exist everywhere today. The RIDE guidelines also need to be modified to reflect that reality, because those types of spaces are not eligible for reimbursement today.
Interestingly, there's actually a state statute that says that unless the funds are going to be used exclusively for K through 12 public education, the community is not entitled to any level of reimbursement. And that was because they didn't want to allow a city or town to build their DPW garage off of their school and get 83% reimbursement from the state to bear those costs. So while however well-intentioned that statute is, we are proposing as part of this proposal to update it so that so long as the funding is being used primarily for K through 12, there would be an opportunity for districts who wanted to consider adding other or offering other services to the students and their families out of the schools.
So the way that's addressed today, or you attempt to address it, is you try to create spaces that are flexible and adaptable. So just by example, when we did the Providence Career and Technical Academy space, it has a large field house. So there were trainers' facilities and coaches' facilities beneath that. We actually designed those spaces to be used as a health clinic. And that was, intentional in response to conversations with folks in the community and the school department at the time, that they could run a health clinic after hours. We had some other spaces that were intended to be able to support some level of community support services for for students and families and allow families to have more access to the building. All of those things cost money to operate, though. So it's one thing, again, to build the facility, and you can seek community partners to come into the building and operate programs, but those programs cost them money to operate, too. So these all become value judgments that we as a Rhode Island community need to make.
I also wonder, because of teaching, the profession itself, and the challenges, especially for families these days, is there also a reimbursable part, and I should know this, but I don't, for creating an environment that people want to work? So for teachers, having daycare, having something, so just like if you want to be innovative, like industry and business, you have workplaces that people want to work, because recruiting really great teachers and keeping great teachers, especially the areas right now of math and science, are very challenging for some school districts. And I just wonder if that is something that would add a benefit, and also would create work experiences for people interested in early childhood, and it just also start thinking about creating schools that are welcoming in all aspects.
It's a great point, Superintendent. The proposal does include additional levels of reimbursement if schools choose to add early childhood centers or educational spaces like that within their buildings. I know that's something that East Providence High School is considering doing. They are merging or consolidating their career and technical center and their high school into one building, and there will be an early childhood center in that school as well. I think we keep coming back to this theme all night, but these are really local decisions that have to be made at the individual level. Our job was to try to create the atmosphere that would allow for those types of decisions to be made, and to incentivize and encourage them to be made quickly so that we can improve the quality of our buildings soon.
All right, hold tight, everybody, because we're going to have one final question at the end of this, and we really want to get your answer to it.
Amelia won.
Before we do that, Wayne, you have a question, and Colin and Amelia, you all are going to get the final last word. You've got fellow panelists. You know what they do for a living. You know why they're here, and you've got a whole audience, and I'm going to give you the opportunity before we leave to say what you want us to do, and what should we be thinking about from the student's perspective. Okay, I'm going to give you that chance right after we get through Wayne's question.
So I think that Linda's stories and the speakers here tonight have made a very, very powerful case for voters to approve this $250 million bond in November. And I want to give a shout out to Amelia and Colin for being so great here tonight and making the case. But a number of speakers have hit on this issue. You talked about the independent man, you talked about towns and cities, and there's a long history in the state dating to colonial times. In fact, we were the last state to approve the Bill of Rights because cities and towns couldn't agree on that document. So there's a long tradition of that. How do you make the case to someone, and I'm going to pick Foster Blossom because I think their schools are in relatively good condition, or you can pick another place where the schools are in relatively good condition, that are not comparable to the job facing you, Mayor, the job facing other communities. How do you make the case to that voter, that taxpayer, vote for this? Take an answer from anyone.
Yeah. Remember what we said earlier. Every single school district had at least one building with a significant health and safety issue, right? So there are people out there, maybe out in the suburbs or wherever, who think, well, my schools are fine, why should all of my money go to another school district? They're wrong. Their schools are not fine. We have school buildings that are in really poor condition in every single school district, every city and town. So the need exists everywhere, and under this plan, every city and town can get additional funding beyond what they would get today. So look, there is not a city or town in Rhode Island that will say we don't have any work to do in our buildings for the next 10 years or the next 15 years. Every school district has a list, of capital improvements that they know they're going to need to make at some point. What we're saying is, if you're going to do it now. We will pay you extra to do it now and get it over with. But, look, I think you've asked the crucial question, because As I've gone around the state and I've been talking about this plan, that's the question that comes up the most. And the answer is, if you think your school district's school buildings are perfect, they're not. They need work too, and this plan will help your community just like all the others.
And I think Linda's story on and the treasurer mentioned this, about the East Greenwich, the ceiling in the East Greenwich elementary school that collapsed, was an eye-opener for the folks in East Greenwich who were feeling the same way about the proposal. The Jacobs report gave each school building in our state a grade, a facility conditions index. The higher that score, the more need that building has. Two really interesting statistics to circle up on the treasurer's point. Of the 20 school buildings with the highest FCI, the 20 school buildings in the state with the highest level of need, the majority, more than half, are located in non-urban core cities. I'll read you the list. Barrington, Cranston, Cumberland, East Providence, Newport, North Kingstown, North Providence, North Smithfield, Warwick, and West Greenwich. And when you look at the school district average FCI, so not just every building got a grade, but each district got a grade. Being number 1 meant you had the highest level of need. Being number 36 means you were the district that had the least amount of need. Now, if I had one of those clickers and I could pick the questions, I would honestly ask the audience.
Next time. Don't get carried away.
Where they would put Providence. Because I know that many folks would say that Providence is it must be one of the communities with the highest level of need. They're not. Providence ranks 16 out of 36. There are 15 cities and towns that have schools that are in worse condition than Providence. I'll read you that list. Cranston, East Providence, Jamestown, Middletown, Newport, North Kingstown, North Providence, Portsmouth, Smithfield, South Kingstown, Tiverton, and Warwick. So I think the treasurer's point is really one that we have to continue to underscore, which is there is need everywhere. Under this proposal, every community can and will be better off. There are examples of facilities conditions in all of our communities. Janice knows this all too well from Cranston. During the snowstorm in January, Cranston East High School, my father is an alum of Cranston East, had to be closed for multiple days. There's a boys' lavatory on the second floor. They were holding the windows in that bathroom closed with duct tape. During the storm, a bunch of snow flew into that bathroom, about a foot to be exact. It caused the pipes to freeze. As gross as this sounds, the urinals exploded off the walls, and the building experienced some significant water damage, including to the brand new computer lab that was underneath it on the first floor. So I think, Wayne, your point is one that is really well taken, and it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to make sure that folks know these statistics. If you haven't seen the Jacobs report, you should go to RIDE's website, the Rhode Island Department of Education. If you Google it, it'll come right up. They actually have an interactive facilities map on their website. You can click on your city and town and see the report. You can click on your school, and you can see the individual schools report. This is a problem that exists everywhere. It's a statewide problem, and it needs a statewide solution.
Bill, quickly, I know you want to add something.
Yeah, so it's understandable why everyone looks at this as a financial issue, but really this is economic development 101. This is education. We didn't get here last year, last 5 years, last 10 years. This problem has been occurring at least over the course of the last 20 years. It's just been growing worse and worse. And if we're going to change the trajectory for the state, if we're going to maintain property values for residents, maintain a tax base for the state, and grow employment opportunities for our kids for the future, we have to do this.
Let's throw that last question up right now. Oh, you've seen this one before. Officials propose a $250 million school building bond referendum. If the referendum were held today, knowing what you know now, how would you vote? We may have lost a few people, so Paul Parker's going to have to do some math over there. Yeah? All right, I think we'll close it. Nope. Let's close it. I think we lost 2 people. In favor. All right, that being said, I promised I give the final words to our students up here on panels, and I tell you what, you guys have done a fine job tonight. Colin, let's start with you, and we'll finish with Amelia. He wants to be the closer. Look at her. She's passing it off. Amelia, go ahead.
So ideally, I would love a school, my school, to look like maybe PCTA or even as simple as Central's building minus the mold. But realistically, just a building where the light fixtures are not going to fall on you any second, a building that isn't full of mold where my French teacher has to be absent because he got sick from the mold, a school where I'm not in danger of slipping from all the water, or a school where the ceilings don't replace the floor because the tiles are falling. So as simple as not being in danger of things falling on you and getting sick from the mold, and also a building that isn't 104 degrees in the summer and 30 degrees in the winter. So, yeah.
Thank you. Final word, Colin.
So as my closing thoughts, I'd like to see more a shift in the opinions and the perspective of adults and legislators and people who are outside of the system. I want more of the opinion of the students. Me and Amelia are here sharing our thoughts on our school's conditions. I think we need more of that because none of the elected officials here are going through their school systems. They know what they're talking about statistically, but do they really understand how it feels to sit in that classroom or to have to wake up every morning and ride the school bus, make the commute to go to school? No, they don't. So what we need to do is we need to get the opinion of the people who are actually doing what it is we are trying to change.
Thank you, Colin. Mayor Elorza, are you ready to go back to Algebra 2 tomorrow? He's trying to get you back in school, back to school. All right. Thank you all for sharing tonight. Coming out in the weather, this is the strangest spring ever, maybe. And we look forward to having you back at another Publick Occurrences soon. Please, a round of applause for Peter Phipps, who organized this evening, Linda Borg, who ran this great series, the renowned Wayne Miller, and thank you all on behalf of the Providence Journal, Leadership Rhode Island, and Rhode Island College. Please drive safely and have a good night.